So how does a debate like a supposedly standard political panel go from discussing commercial shipping lanes in the Middle East to suddenly accusing a political commentator of being a, quote, communist jihadist who hates his own heritage?
Yeah, it's an absolute wild ride.
It really is. Today, we are unpacking a debate that didn't just break the rules of civil discourse, it kind of shattered the very concept of a shared reality. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. I'm just so thrilled to have you with us today because we are jumping into an absolute geopolitical powder keg.
A total powder keg. We are looking at a really volatile recent debate which was hosted on Mario Nawfal's platform, and the two voices clashing here. I mean, they could not be operating from more different universes if they tried.
Right, so on one side, you have Cenk Uygur. He is a secular, left-wing, progressive commentator.
Very vocal, very well known in progressive spaces.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have Yishai Fleisher. He's a right-wing Israeli settler, a spokesperson for the Jewish community in Hebron, and just a very active regional player.
Hmm.
Now, before we even touch the substance of this, because this material is highly charged, deeply personal and heavily political, we need to set the ground rules for you, the listener, right out of the gate.
Yeah, this is incredibly important.
We want to be crystal clear. We are not taking sides.
Absolutely not. That is not what we do here.
Our mission today is to act entirely as your analytical guides. We are going to impartially map out the exact arguments both men make, dissect the rhetoric they use, and hopefully help you understand the fundamentally different historical and moral frameworks they are operating from.
Right. We aren't here to endorse either viewpoint. We are literally just here to unpack them.
And that unpacking is so vital, right? Because
Yeah.
the value of analyzing a collision like this isn't about, keeping score or declaring a winner.
No, not at all. The real value is in deconstructing how two highly educated, highly vocal people can look at the exact same geographic region, the exact same historical timeline, and just process it into two completely irreconcilable realities.
It's fascinating. What does this specific, incredibly heated exchange reveal about the broader ongoing narrative surrounding the U.S. Israel relationship?
Well, to figure that out, we have to start at the beginning.
So let's get right into the breaking news that kicked this whole thing off, because it acts as the perfect catalyst for the explosion that follows.
It really sets the stage.
The moderator, Mario Nawfal, starts the conversation by dropping two massive pieces of geopolitical news on the table. The first is a report from Israel's Channel 13 detailing massive...
Yeah, to prevent a broader regional war.
Yeah?
But the second piece of news is the real wild card here.
Oh, totally. Nawfal cites a Wall Street Journal report claiming that Donald Trump has told his senior aides that if he were to return to power, he is willing to end the shadow war with Iran completely. And he doesn't even need a nuclear deal to do it.
Which is a huge shift in precedent.
Massive. His singular requirement for backing off Iran is just keeping the maritime shipping straits open. He just wants global commerce to flow.
And this forces both Tank and Yishai to instantly react.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they completely reveal their core geopolitical philosophies.
Yeah.
You have Trump representing this highly transactional, purely economic, America-first approach to foreign policy, right?
Yeah.
In that framework, the Middle East isn't a holy land. It isn't a theater of moral absolutes. It's just a supply chain choke point.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because on the surface, keeping shipping lanes open sounds like, standard pragmatic diplomacy. But I'm looking at Yishai Fleisher's reaction to this, and he doesn't treat this like a business negotiation at all. How does Trump's transactional goal clash so violently with the deeply ideological, multi-generational conflict that Yishai sees on the ground?
Well, because Yishai looks at Trump's willingness to just, make a deal over shipping lanes, and he sees a terrifying weakness.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He doesn't see pragmatism at all. He sees appeasement. Fleischer explicitly states that the West, and specifically the United States, is simply not ready for what he calls a long war.
A long war.
Right. He believes that taking this conflict to its necessary conclusion means a multi-year, grueling battle to entirely cripple jihadism across the entire Middle East. And to drive this point home, he uses a very specific, very heavy historical anchor. He brings up Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor. I mean, that is not a casual comparison to make.
No, it's not.
When you invoke Pearl Harbor in American political discourse, you're basically summoning the ultimate ghost of righteous intervention. But is it a fair comparison, or is this like a rhetorical trick to force American intervention by making the U.S. feel cowardly if they don't act?
Honestly, it is a masterclass in framing. Think about what invoking Pearl Harbor actually accomplishes rhetorically. Fleischer is reminding the audience that it took a catastrophic, out-of-the-blue shock for the United States to finally wake up and commit to a massive 6-year total war.
Right, to defeat the Nazis and Imperial Japan.
Yes. So by making that comparison, Fleischer is implying that the West today is currently asleep, just like it was in 1939 and 1940. He's framing anyone who wants to de-escalate, including Trump, by the way, as a modern-day Neville Chamberlain practicing naive appeasement.
Wow, so he's saying the U.S. is just sticking its head in the sand?
Exactly. He's suggesting that the U.S. lacks the stomach, the moral clarity, and the endurance for the battle that Israel is currently fighting on its behalf.
He essentially views Israel's fight against Iranian-backed groups as an existential necessity for global civilization, regardless of whether the American president just wants cheap oil and safe cargo ships.
Right, he sees it as a civilizational clash.
But then you pivot to Cenk Uygur's reaction to the exact same Wall Street Journal report, and it is just a total 180-degree turn.
Completely opposite.
Cenk hears that Trump is willing to drop the nuclear deal requirement, and he doesn't see a sleepy, weak America at all. He sees a smoking gun.
A smoking gun, I like that.
Yeah, Cenk views Trump dropping what he calls the flimsy excuse of the Iranian nuclear program as absolute proof that the United States has absolutely no business being in a war with Iran in the first place.
Right, because if we look at the mechanics of Cenk's argument, he is essentially claiming that the American public has been sold a massive bill of goods for decades.
Yep.
His point is, if an American president is willing to just shrug off the Iranian nuclear issue just to keep us straight open for cargo ships, then the nuclear issue was never the ticking time bomb of an existential threat it was made out to be.
Right. Cenk's logic is, if the nuke threat was real, no president would ever trade it for shipping logistics.
Exactly. You don't trade existential survival for cheap flat-screen TVs.
Right. Therefore, the threat is manufactured. And if the threat is manufactured, why is America constantly on the brink of war in the region? Cenk argues that the only reason the U.S. is involved in these we are talking about a clash of core paradigms. Let's start with Yishai's paradigm, because I think it might surprise some listeners who are accustomed to modern news, which often frames Israel primarily through the lens of its formidable, high-tech military strength.
Yeah, the Goliath framing.
Exactly. But Yishai doesn't frame Israel as a Goliath at all. He frames Israel as a tiny, highly vulnerable minority.
He really leans into the demographic reality. He repeatedly emphasizes that there are 7 million Jews surrounded by roughly 400 million Arabs in the broader Middle East.
He coins a specific phrase for it, doesn't he?
He does. He calls Israel the liberation nation.
The liberation nation.
Yeah, and he expands the definition of who they are liberating, which is really interesting.
How so?
He claims Israel isn't just fighting for Jewish survival. He asserts they are fighting on behalf of Druze communities, Kurdish populations, South Lebanese Christians, Egyptian Copts, basically any minority group in the region pushing back against what he terms jihadist Palestinianism.
Wow, so he's positioning Israel as the defender of all regional minorities.
Exactly. He paints this vivid picture of everyday Arabs secretly pleading with Israel to lift the yoke of fundamentalist groups like Hamas and the Palestinian Authority off their backs.
So in Yishai's paradigm, Israel is the besieged fortress of liberty. It is the moral and military vanguard standing up to a regional monolith of extremism.
That's his reality, yes. Now contrast that with Cenk's paradigm.
It's not just a disagreement on the margins. It's an absolute inversion of reality. Cenk views Israel as an aggressive, relentlessly expanding settler colony.
Settler colony. That's a heavy term.
It is, and he brings in entirely different statistics to back it up. He points out that prior to 1948, the Jewish population held roughly 6% of the land property in the region.
Okay.
But today, he argues, they control well over 100% of the original mandate territory because they are actively encroaching on Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria.
The math of expansion.
Right. So when Yishai brings up the concept of Israel liberating people, Cenk literally laughs out loud.
He does. He just bursts out laughing.
He mocks the premise entirely, saying something to the effect of, like, oh, right, you had to liberate them from their lives and their property by dropping bombs on them.
This is the absolute crux of the communication breakdown right here. You have to look at how Yishai uses that statistical reality of being a regional minority.
The 7 million among 400 million.
Right. He uses that demographic disparity to justify preemptive, continuous, and overwhelming military action.
Because they're outnumbered.
In his psychological framework, when you are that vastly outnumbered by forces that historically, rhetorically, and militarily express a desire to destroy you, every single aggressive military action you take is actually a defensive necessity.
It's just survival.
Exactly. You are simply expanding the perimeter, is what he calls extending the defense umbrella.
It reminds me of that classic optical illusion. You know, the one where you look at a drawing and you either see a vulnerable duck facing left or you see a predatory rabbit facing right?
Oh yeah, the duck rabbit.
But human cognition prevents you from seeing both simultaneously. Depending on which lines your brain connects, the entire nature of the animal changes.
That is a perfect analogy.
Cenk and Yishai are looking at the exact same map of the Middle East, the exact same history of military operations. And Cenk sees the predatory rabbit expanding its territory, while Yishai sees the vulnerable duck desperately trying to protect its pond from wolves.
That analogy hits the nail on the head because it perfectly explains the differing metrics of vulnerability. Yishai uses the macro demographic of the entire Middle East, 7 million Jews versus 400 million Arabs, to establish a state of perpetual existential vulnerability.
Right.
But Cenk zooms in and counters that with a micro-demographic metric of vulnerability, based entirely on immediate power dynamics.
Right. Cenk brings the focus squarely onto the Palestinian perspective. He counters Yishai's 7 million number by citing that there are 5.5 million displaced, stateless, or militarily contained Palestinians living between the West Bank and Gaza.
He flips the vulnerability metric completely.
He does, and Cenk uses incredibly graphic, visceral imagery to completely dismantle Yishai's liberator narrative.
Oh, he doesn't hold back at all.
Yeah.
He describes the reality of the Israeli military squeezing over 2 million people into a designated safe zone in Gaza that he calculates is roughly 30% the size of Las Vegas.
30% the size of Vegas. That really puts it into perspective for an American audience.
And he emphasizes that this is happening after dropping the equivalent explosive yield of 13 atomic bombs on that tiny strip of land. He talks about the absolute horror of dropping 2,000-pound precision munitions on dense civilian infrastructure.
Cenk's core argument here is that this bunker mentality, this ingrained belief that the entire world hates you simply because you are Jewish, and therefore you must always strike first and strike hardest, actually creates a horrific self-fulfilling prophecy.
A self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, he argues that it isn't some inherent ancient anti-Semitism driving modern regional hatred against Israel today. Instead, he claims it is Israel's own preemptive, massive, and disproportionate military aggression that is actively radicalizing the populations around them.
It is just an impenetrable loop of logic on both sides. Yishai is essentially saying we must use maximum force because we are surrounded and hated.
Right.
And Cenk is replying, you are surrounded and hated because you are using maximum disproportionate force on a vulnerable, stateless population.
But I want to pause here because I'm struggling with a piece of Yishai's logic.
Sure. What is it?
If Israel is the moral vanguard, the liberator protecting all these other minority groups, as Yishai claims, how does that square with the sheer scale of civilian casualties Cenk is pointing out? Does Yishai address the cognitive dissonance of liberating a region by reducing its cities to rubble?
Well, from Yishai's perspective, the responsibility for those casualties lies entirely on the fundamentalist groups who embed themselves within civilian populations.
The human shield argument.
Yes. He views the tragic loss of civilian life not as a flaw in Israel's moral compass, but as evidence of the total depravity of the enemy they are fighting. To Yishai, if Hamas or Hezbollah didn't exist, the bombs wouldn't drop. Therefore, the force is justified.
So the moral calculus is entirely externalized.
Completely.
But if Yishai's argument about being a vulnerable, besieged minority falls apart for Cenk when you look at the human cost on the ground, it falls apart even faster for Cenk when you look at the balance sheet.
Oh, the balance sheet. Here we go.
Because if Israel is so vulnerable, Cenk asks, why is it backed by a blank check from the wealthiest, most powerful military empire in the history of the world?
Which brings us perfectly to the financial and political tether between the United States and Israel. And I have to say, the financial debate is where the rhetoric in this exchange reaches an absolute boiling point.
Boiling is putting it mildly.
Cenk launches a barrage of accusations regarding the true cost of the U.S. Israel alliance that is staggering in its scope.
He does not pull a single punch. Cenk claims that over the decades, Israel has manipulated and dragged the United States into 7 different wars in the Middle East. Wars that he calculates have cost the American taxpayer a staggering $8 trillion.
$8 trillion.
Yes, with a T. But he goes even further into the realm of espionage.
Yeah, this part was wild.
He claims that historically, Israel effectively stole U.S. nuclear secrets and weapons-grade uranium to build their own undeclared weapons of mass destruction program. An act he frames as robbing the U.S. of $320 billion in value and security over time.
And he immediately transitions from those historical military costs to modern domestic political corruption. Cenk targets the pro-Israel lobbying apparatus in Washington, specifically focusing on AIPAC.
The American Israel Public Affairs Committee.
Right.
And he makes an incredibly bold assertion here. Cenk claims that the Israeli lobby has essentially purchased the American government wholesale. He throws out the statistic that they own 94% of Congress, as well as presidents from both the Democratic and Republican parties.
94%.
Yeah. And to back up this claim of a bought and paid for government, he cites very recent figures. He points to the Biden administration securing a $21 billion aid package for Israel and contrasts that with the Trump administration previously securing $13 billion.
Right, bipartisan cash flow.
Exactly. All of which Cenk argues is fueled by massive legalized bribery via campaign donations from mega billionaires like Miriam Adelson.
For Cenk, the U.S. Israel alliance is fundamentally a parasite-host relationship. And America is the host being continually drained of its wealth, its global standing, and its moral authority.
But then Yishai responds, and his defense against this onslaught of financial accusations is fascinating because he doesn't deny the flow of money. He completely reframes the nature of the transaction.
Exactly. Yishai counters that the $3 billion a year in standard baseline military aid that Israel receives is, to use his exact word, pennies. Yes. Pennies in the grand scheme of the multi-trillion-dollar U.S. federal budget. But more importantly, he argues that calling it aid is a misnomer. He says it's essentially a massive circular subsidy for American defense contractors.
Right, because the legal stipulation of that foreign military financing is that Israel is required to spend the vast majority of those billions exclusively on American-made weapons systems.
Your Lockheed Martins, your Boeings, your Raytheons.
Precisely. So Yishai is looking at Cenk and saying, you aren't giving us a handout. You're laundering your own tax dollars through the Middle East to pay your own domestic corporations and stimulate the American manufacturing sector.
It's a very pragmatic, almost cynical economic defense.
But wait, I have to push back on Yishai's logic here. He's saying the $3 billion is just a subsidy for U.S. contractors, but doesn't that completely ignore the massive geopolitical and diplomatic cover the United States provides Israel at the United Nations?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about the cash transfer. It's about the United States vetoing resolution after resolution. You just can't put a price tag on superpower immunity.
That is a crucial point. And it's one that often gets lost when the debate devolves purely into dollar amounts. The diplomatic shield is arguably worth far more than the weaponry itself.
For sure.
But this brings us to what might be the most shocking horseshoe theory moment of the entire debate. Because despite Yishai defending the utility and the mechanics of the financial aid, he actually completely agrees with Cenk's ultimate conclusion.
This part blew my mind.
Yishai looks into the camera and states unequivocally that he wants to end all U.S. financial assistance to Israel.
I couldn't believe it when I heard it. You have a secular, progressive, left-wing commentator and a right-wing, religious Israeli settler actually agreeing on a massive policy point. The U.S. needs to cut the checkbook and stop funding Israel.
But the reasons they want to sever this financial tie couldn't possibly be further apart.
Oh, obviously. It all comes down to the geopolitical concept of leverage. Yishai wants to end the aid because he wants Israel to be fully, uncompromisingly independent.
He is exhausted by the reality of the United States holding a leash on Israeli military operations.
Right.
He quotes Senator Marco Rubio, who framed Israel as America's frontline aircraft carrier in the Middle East. Basically an unsinkable base defending Western civilization against groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda.
Yishai truly believes Israel is providing a massive, underappreciated service to the American empire.
He does.
And his logic is, if this relatively tiny amount of financial aid comes with political strings attached, strings that force Israel to pause bombings or delay ground invasions or negotiate when they just want to fight, then the money simply isn't worth the loss of sovereignty. Yishai wants financial decoupling to achieve total, unrestricted operational freedom.
Whereas Cenk wants decoupling because he views Israel not as a defensive aircraft carrier, but as a heavy, rotting albatross around America's neck.
An albatross that is actively dragging the ship down into the abyss.
Right. Cenk argues that this alliance causes catastrophic global blowback for America. He points out a very brutal reality. When civilians are pulled from the rubble in Gaza, the shrapnel from the bombs often literally says, "Made in the USA."
It's a dark reality.
Cenk doesn't just want to stop the cash flow. He wants total diplomatic and military decoupling. He wants to stop the merging of military technology and intelligence sharing.
He believes the U.S. extract absolutely zero strategic value out of the relationship and instead is left holding the bag, absorbing the hatred of the global South for what he describes as Israel's lunatic and fascist tendencies.
So Yishai counters this by expanding the lens globally. He warns that if America actually listens to people like Cenk Uygur, if Washington abandons its most visible ally in the Middle East over human rights concerns or progressive pressure, the rest of the world is watching closely.
Yeah, he specifically mentions Taiwan, doesn't he?
He does. He argues that if the U.S. abandons Israel, allies in the Pacific will instantly realize that American security guarantees are worthless.
Yishai sees Cenk's isolationist ideology as a direct threat that will inevitably collapse American hegemony on the global stage.
It's a profound debate over who is actually using whom.
Right. Is America using Israel as a cheap, localized, highly motivated military base to fight radicalism without risking American troops? Or is Israel using America as an endless ATM and a global bodyguard at the UN to expand its own regional empire without facing international sanctions?
And that question of expanding a regional empire perfectly transitions us into what was arguably the most visual and certainly the most revealing part of this entire exchange.
Yes, the map.
The moderator, Mario, brings up a specific image that instantly derails any pretense that this conflict is just about maintaining the status quo.
This was a wild moment. Mario displays a map on the screen. It was originally a map produced by UNICEF, but it had been officially posted and shared by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Now, the context of the map was supposed to be about childhood malnutrition in the region.
But someone in the graphics department, whether intentionally or accidentally, made a very telling, deeply controversial design choice.
What did they do?
The map inadvertently shaded the territory of South Lebanon in gray, visually grouping it with Israel as if it were already Israeli territory.
Oh, wow. Now, officially, if you go to the UN or read State Department briefings, Israel's stated policy is that they have no desire to permanently occupy or annex Lebanese territory.
Right, officially.
But Mario looks at this map, published by Israel's own government, and asks a very simple, devastating question. He points to the endless, grinding cycle of violence in contested border areas like the Sheba farms.
And he outlines the cycle perfectly.
He does. Israel wins a defensive war. They capture a strip of land to push back fighters. Then, local militias like Hezbollah form specifically to fight and get that land back. Israel fights those militias, pushes further, and takes even more land for a new buffer zone.
And Mario asks Yishai directly, where does the map stop changing? Where is the final border?
It's like playing a board game where the rules change every time one player rolls the dice. And the way Yishai answers this is crucial because it raises a fundamental question about the definition of defense in international law versus the definition of defense in religious nationalism.
Yishai's justification for territorial expansion is incredibly blunt here.
He doesn't deny it at all.
No, he admits proudly that the borders of Israel are expanding. But he attempts to make a very sharp rhetorical distinction. He insists that Israelis are nationalists, not imperialists.
Okay, we need to really dig into this because this sounds like a massive contradiction in terms. How can a nation constantly expand its borders, absorb new territory, govern the people on that territory under military law, and still claim they aren't an imperial power?
It's a very specific worldview.
It's like claiming squatters' rights on your neighbor's yard because their dog bit you. You might have genuinely been attacked by the dog, but legally and morally, does that give you the right to absorb their property permanently, build a house on it, and claim you only did it to build a better fence?
That's a great analogy.
If capturing land is always justified as creating a necessary defense umbrella, does the border ever stop moving outward?
Well, under Yishai's interpretation of international law, he argues that if a sovereign nation is attacked by its neighbors, and that nation wins the resulting defensive war, they are legally and morally allowed to hold on to the captured land, to create a buffer zone to prevent future attacks.
But he goes so much further than just military buffer zones. He completely shifts the justification away from secular international law and pivots directly into indigenous historical and religious claims.
Exactly. When pressed about the West Bank, a territory the vast majority of the international community recognizes as occupied Palestinian land, Yishai uses the biblical terms, Judea and Samaria.
Judea and Samaria.
Right. He explicitly states that this is indigenous Jewish land. He goes on the record on this massive platform and states unequivocally that Judea and Samaria will eventually be fully annexed by the State of Israel.
And he makes an incredible claim about the demographics of that land, too. He claims that the Arab populations living in the West Bank aren't indigenous to it in the way the Jews are.
Yeah, his historical framing is very specific.
He asserts that many of them originally migrated to the region over the last century simply to make a living off the economic engine that the early Zionist pioneers were building. He frames the Palestinian presence almost as a byproduct of Jewish economic success.
Now, for Cenk Uygur, watching Yishai lay out this roadmap of annexation is the ultimate vindication of everything he's been screaming about for the last hour.
Oh, Cenk practically takes a victory lap on screen.
He really does.
Because Cenk's ultimate stated policy goal, which is, the standard progressive and international consensus, is a two-state solution. A return to the pre-1967 borders, establishing a sovereign contiguous state of Palestine alongside a sovereign state of Israel.
The 1967 borders.
But Cenk has always argued that Israel has no intention of ever allowing a Palestinian state to exist. So when he hears Yishai openly admit that the borders are expanding and openly state the plan to annex the West Bank, Cenk jumps on it.
He literally says, "Thank you for proving my point."
Cenk argues that Yishai's open desire to annex the West Bank, combined with the ongoing devastating military actions in Gaza and the push into Lebanon, proves the settler colony thesis perfectly.
It locks his whole argument into place.
Cenk's logic is bulletproof in his own mind. You cannot claim to the international community that you just want to be left alone in peace, while you are simultaneously actively planning to permanently absorb foreign territory that holds millions of non-Jewish people.
What's truly fascinating to observe here is the total catastrophic breakdown of language between the two men.
Oh, completely.
They're using the same English words, but the dictionary definitions they are relying on are completely different. When Cenk hears the word expansion, his political framework translates that word into imperialism, land theft, and ethnic cleansing.
Right.
But when Yishai hears the word expansion, his historical and religious framework translates it into indigenous ingathering, national security, and divine destiny.
They aren't just disagreeing on where to draw a line on a map. They are disagreeing on the fundamental nature of time, history, and human rights.
Exactly.
And when you disagree on the fundamental nature of reality itself, a debate cannot remain abstract for very long. It gets incredibly personal, incredibly fast.
It gets really ugly.
Which brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most intense section of our deep dive. The rhetorical warfare, the identity politics, and the ultimate clash over religion.
This is the moment in the transcript where the debate fully strips away the polite veneer of geopolitical strategy. The shipping lanes, the defense budgets, the UN resolutions, and descends into a raw, ideological street brawl.
A street brawl is the only way to describe it.
Yishai deploys a very specific, highly structured political framework to attack not just Cenk's arguments, but Cenk's core motivations as a human being. He accuses Cenk of being a central player in what he calls the Red-Green Alliance.
The Red-Green Alliance. Okay, if you aren't familiar with this term, listener, it is a crucial piece of modern right-wing political theory that has gained a lot of traction recently.
It's everywhere now.
It's the theory that secular Marxist-leaning progressives in the West, that's the red, are consciously forming an unholy strategic alliance with fundamentalist Islamic groups, that's the green.
Right.
And the theory suggests they're doing this because despite having completely opposite social values regarding women's rights, LGBTQ issues, and religious freedom, they share one massive unifying common enemy: Western civilization, capitalism, and American hegemony.
Right, and Yishai applies this label directly to Cenk, calling him a communist jihadist.
Which is an incredibly loaded oxymoron if you think about it.
It is, but Yishai backs it up by connecting Cenk's domestic American politics to his foreign policy. Yishai argues that Cenk's support for progressive policies like movements to defund the police, abolish ICE, and defund Israel are not separate issues.
He ties them all together.
Yishai claims they are all part of a concerted, unified effort to systematically strip away the masculine defenses of Western society.
Masculine defenses, wow.
Yeah. He accuses Cenk of trying to bring a subversive form of neo-Leninism to America and suggests that Cenk is specifically using the hatred of Jews and the vilification of Israel as the wedge issue to radicalize young Americans against their own country.
And Yishai doesn't stop at political theory. He gets deeply personal with Cenk's ethnic heritage. He reaches all the way back into history, specifically to the year 1492.
1492.
Now, 1492 is mostly known in America for Columbus, but in Jewish history, it is the year of the Alhambra Decree, the brutal expulsion of the Jewish population from Spain during the Inquisition.
A horrific period.
Yishai points out that during this horrific period of European anti-Semitism, it was the Ottoman Empire, the ancestors of modern Turks, who sent ships to rescue fleeing Jews, bringing them to places like Istanbul and integrating them into their society because they recognized their immense value and intellect.
It's a profound piece of historical memory to invoke.
It really is. And Yishai wields this history like a weapon. He looks at Cenk, a proud Turkish American, and accuses him of betraying his own noble heritage. He tells Cenk that his ancestors saved the Jews, but today, Cenk is selling out the Jewish people to pander to a radical left-wing audience.
And Yishai takes the hypocrisy accusation even further by bringing up the Uyghurs, the heavily pressed Muslim minority currently facing mass internment and cultural erasure in Xinjiang, China.
This was a really sharp pivot.
Yishai notes that Cenk's very namesake is tied to the Uyghur people, and he uses this to launch a devastating rhetorical attack. He asks, if Cenk is so deeply concerned about human rights and the oppression of Muslim minorities, why is he obsessively focused on the Jewish state, while remaining relatively quiet about the millions of people sharing his own linguistic and cultural heritage who are locked in Chinese concentration camps?
Cenk's reaction to this onslaught is just a wall of absolute visible exasperation. He immediately points out the sheer absurdity of calling him a communist by noting that he is a literal capitalist who built, owns, and operates a highly successful for-profit media corporation.
Right, he's a businessman.
And he forcefully rejects the jihadist label by stating unequivocally that he is a stone-cold atheist who walked away from the Islamic faith of his youth entirely.
And Cenk's atheism becomes the absolute linchpin of his counterattack here. Because Cenk argues that this entire bloody conflict, spanning decades, is ultimately driven by people who have entirely lost touch with material reality.
He uses highly inflammatory and deeply secular language to mock the religious foundations of the conflict. He ridicules the idea that an invisible creature in the sky whispered into the ears of ancient Jewish or Muslim fundamentalists, giving them the divine, eternal right to steal land, displace families, and murder their neighbors with impunity.
Which brings us to the core realization of why this debate feels so unresolvable. How do you even begin to mediate a conflict like this?
You can't.
You have Cenk Uygur arguing from a place of strictly secular, materialist geopolitics. He's focused on physical borders, civilian casualty numbers, international law, and the exact accounting of U.S. tax dollars.
And on the other side, you have Yishai Fleisher arguing from a place of literal, unironic divine prophecy.
Exactly. When you look at the deeper implications of Yishai's worldview, he isn't just reciting political talking points. He explicitly states that the ingathering of 7 million Jews to the modern state of Israel after 2 millennia of exile is not just a historical anomaly.
No.
He says it is a literal, tangible miracle. He speaks of a prophesied return. He talks about the ultimate goal of building the Third Temple in Jerusalem, framing it not as an act of religious dominance, but as creating a house of prayer for all nations.
So it's theological.
When Yishai defends his positions, he isn't fundamentally arguing international law or UN mandates. He is arguing theology and destiny.
And Cenk looks at that exact same religious fervor, that exact same talk of prophecy and temples, and sees it as the root cause of deep, terrifying immorality.
He sees it as a detachment from reality.
Cenk argues that when a group of people truly believe that the creator of the universe promised them a specific plot of land 3,000 years ago, it allows them to completely bypass all modern human morality.
Right.
In Cenk's view, religious zealotry provides the ultimate permission structure. It allows you to drop 2,000-pound bombs on apartment buildings and displace millions of desperate people because you believe you possess a divine mandate that entirely overrides secular law and human empathy.
And just to close the loop on the Uyghur argument, because Cenk doesn't let that slide at all.
No, he jumps right back to it.
He provides a very specific, structurally sound counter. Cenk states clearly that he does care deeply about the Uyghurs, and he frequently uses his media platforms to speak out against the Chinese Communist Party's treatment of them.
Right.
But he highlights the crucial, undeniable geopolitical difference. The United States government is not funding China's oppression of the Uyghurs.
Right. American taxpayers are not sending $3 billion a year in military aid to Beijing to build those internment camps. American diplomats aren't vetoing UN resolutions condemning China's actions.
Exactly. Therefore, Cenk argues that as an American citizen and an American taxpayer, his primary moral and political responsibility is to focus intensely on the atrocities that his own tax dollars are actively, directly funding in Israel.
He refuses to let Yishai use the Uyghurs as a whataboutism to deflect from American complicity in Gaza.
It all comes back to the money, the leverage, and the core identity of what America is choosing to support in the world.
Which brings us to the end of this incredibly dense, chaotic map. If you've been watching the news lately and feeling utterly confused as to why peace talks continually fail despite massive, coordinated U.S. pressure, the profound disconnect we just highlighted between these two men is the exact reason why.
We've traversed an immense amount of ground today.
So much ground.
We started with breaking news about Donald Trump's transactional, business-first view of Middle Eastern shipping lanes. We moved through bitter, trillion-dollar arguments over U.S. tax dollars and military-industrial subsidies. And we ended up deep in the weeds of theological disputes about divine land rights, invisible creatures, and the prophesied building of a third temple.
It truly is a perfect microcosm of why the Middle East conflict remains so agonizingly intractable. The two sides don't just disagree on the wording of a peace treaty or where to draw a borderline on a map. They exist in entirely different historical, moral, and spiritual realities.
Yeah, completely separate realities.
When one side is arguing data, casualty metrics, and international law, and the other side is arguing destiny, prophecy, and divine right, there is simply no shared vocabulary for peace.
And that is exactly why mapping these underlying arguments out is so vital for you, the listener. Even if the debate we reviewed was hostile, even if it felt like they were just shouting past each other for an hour, understanding how and why they talk past each other is the key to cutting through the noise.
The next time a headline breaks on your phone about a new crisis in U.S. Israel relations, or Congress debates a new multi-billion-dollar aid package, or a border skirmish breaks out in South Lebanon, you now have the decoder ring to understand the deeper paradigms driving the rhetoric.
You really do.
You understand that when a politician stands at a podium and talks about security, one side of the room hears the word defense and the other side hears the word expansion.
It changes how you process the daily news cycle entirely.
And we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own time. We spent a lot of time talking about that incredible horseshoe moment, the moment where both Cenk, the progressive left-wing commentator, and Yishai, the right-wing Israeli settler, enthusiastically agreed that American military aid to Israel should come to a complete end.
Right. They both want to rip up the check just for entirely opposite reasons.
So here is the question to take with you. If the United States government actually took their advice, if America completely ended the billions in military aid, pulled back its diplomatic cover at the UN, and fully decoupled from the region, what would actually happen?
It's a huge hypothetical.
Would the sudden loss of American support finally force Israel to the negotiating table, forcing them to compromise and create the peaceful two-state resolution that Cenk desires?
Or, and this is the flip side, would it simply remove America's only leash?
Exactly.
Would total decoupling unleash a rapidly expanding, fully independent, highly militarized regional superpower, completely unburdened by Washington's concerns and driven entirely by the kind of divine destiny that Yishai envisions?
It's the ultimate geopolitical gamble. We started this deep dive talking about the expectation of a shared reality and how looking at the Middle East is like two people looking at the same map and seeing completely different worlds. Maybe the real danger isn't that they see different maps. Maybe the real danger is what happens when one of them finally gets the unrestricted power to draw the borders for real. Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the map.
Until next time.